Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. And I've been having a good last few days listening to Beatles records. And as those of you who follow my channel know, I've been trying to react album by album, song by song to the Beatles. I would have grown up with greatest hits collection, and I want to take the time to appreciate the art as it was actually envisioned together. And now it's time to react to the end of the Beatles catalog. And I realized that would present a problem. What is the last Beatles album? Some people say it's Let It Be, because that was indeed the last one that was released. And I like that idea, I guess, because I'm a very cover art-centric person, and I've always read this Let It Be cover as suggesting, 4 different solo artists. Each of these blown up could be the cover of a record, albeit a not very interesting cover to a record, but I like them together. The last record they actually recorded was Abbey Road. Historically, that's a bit messy because after Abbey Road, they went back and tweaked around with Let It Be, and there were still recordings to be done. And as someone who's envisioned one project first and then recorded another project, so as was the case, I ended up recording my Call of the Alien Bug album earlier than some other albums that I had previously envisioned. I get that it's ambiguous. And then when I looked a bit into the controversy, apparently it's more than just what was recorded when, because some people say, well, Abbey Road is one of the great albums of all time, and Let It Be, it has just a lot of live, messy recordings, incomplete songs. It's not the most satisfying thing to listen to, so I don't know, maybe some people go so far as to say it's not really an album, it's more just a collection of demos, a bootleg project, that the Beatles really ended with Abbey Road. I ultimately couldn't be happy with that. I mean, I've thought of Let It Be as an album for years, so I decided what I'm going to do, kind of like the Beatles, I'm recording these 2 videos around the same time. I'm recording this reaction to Let It Be first, but I think I'm going to publish my reaction to Abbey Road before my reaction to Let It Be. This was a record where indeed I hadn't heard a lot of the content as individual pieces before checking it out, so now, finally checking out Let It Be. So the first track on the record is called Two of Us. It opens with some studio banter, and this is because this album was sort of seen as a soundtrack to a documentary. The vision of the documentary and sort of the conceit of this album was that the Beatles had been only doing studio stuff for a long time, and Paul wanted them to, go back to doing live performances. And thus, as part of the Let It Be process, they did their live rooftop show where they famously sang Don't Let Me Down. But anyway, you get this sort of live, back-to-roots sense instantly with Two of Us, where you can hear John and Paul singing together. The music is primarily acoustic guitar. And what I got from this song is that, a good proportion of the Beatles' tracks are credited to the songwriting partnership of Lennon and McCartney. But by the time you get to the second half of the Beatles' catalog, that's more of a formality. So you basically know that Yesterday, Hey Jude, Lady Madonna, that those are Paul songs, even if they're called Lennon-McCartney songs. And similarly, I Am the Walrus, Come Together, Strawberry Fields, etc. Those are John songs, even though they are formerly Lennon-McCartney songs. So I think this song was a nostalgia for the idea of Lennon-McCartney not as these 2 very different singer-songwriters, but as a partnership. And because of the acoustic sound, it has this kind of Western feel to it, 2 desperados out on the road. 2 of us riding nowhere, spending someone's hard-earned pay. You and me Sunday driving, not arriving, on our way back home. And this one really cued me into the frustrations of Let It Be as a record, because I thought this was a beautiful song, and I thought it wasn't recorded in such a rustic way. It might be remembered as one of the A-list Beatles songs, but it just kind of sounds like a messy jam, and that's a shame. I wish they'd gotten to record a nicer version of it. Now, track number 2 is called Dig a Pony. This is a John Lennon composition, and on the surface, it should be messier than Two of Us, but it actually comes out closer to sounding like a polished Beatles song. Now, if you look at the lyrics, they're just nonsense, and they're not really interesting nonsense. It's not up there with I Am the Walrus or Come Together. But, John sings it with such expression, and his voice is at a better level in the mix, that overall it's a better sounding song, particularly on the chorus of the All I Want Is You's. And supposedly the song is both kind of a love song to Yoko and another example of John Lennon being inspired by Bob Dylan and wanting to string nonsense phrases together. So make of it what you will. Track number 3 on the record is Across the Universe. And some might say this speaks to the non-genuineness of Let It Be as a project, because Across the Universe was actually a song that the Beatles contributed to a compilation album by various artists. Also included the Bee Gees, Cilla Black, Lulu, not remembering the others off the top of my head. Rolf Harrison, I think that's his name, the Tommy Kangaroo Down guy. But anyway, it was this compilation album from 1968 to raise money for the World Wildlife Fund. And I guess it kind of makes sense that you'd write this song about across the universe, because I guess it could be a nice anthem for National Geographic magazine and maybe WWF. One of the things I was looking forward to in this Beatles project is I hadn't heard either Mother Nature's Son or Across the Universe. And those titles both really intrigued me, because I thought, wait a minute, were the Beatles John Denver before they were John Denver with Mother Nature's Son? And were they David Bowie before there was David Bowie with Across the Universe? And in both cases of the songs, I was kind of underwhelmed by them. I'm like, okay, we really did need John Denver to sing the nature songs and David Bowie to sing the outer space songs. The production on this version of Across the Universe isn't complete. If you want to hear the good version, look for the version from the World Wildlife Fund album, where they bring in some chirping birds and a backup children's choir. This song, it just sounds kind of underwhelming, but there's a kind of weird mysteriousness to it. Even if John was the one who distanced himself most from the Mahari Mahesh Yogi, at the time he was writing this song, I guess he was still into the idea of chanting mantras. That's not a spiritual thing I really understand, but I think it's the idea of like grounding yourself and remembering your spiritual perspective by chanting a similar phrase. So there's a point where he just goes, Jai Guru Deva, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but then again, I'm sure John was too. And it just means glory to the shining remover of darkness. There's also a kind of weirdness to this song, because the chorus is, nothing's gonna change my world. It's kind of haunting. You'd think a song about making the world a better place would want the world to change, and I guess what John is thinking is he's writing this for the World Wildlife Fund. He's thinking about conservation, so he's, I guess, chanting this mantra that, pollution or whatever other environmental catastrophes were envisioned at the time were not going to destroy the broader wildlife community. Now, track 4 on the record, one of the last that was recorded, they couldn't get John Lennon to show up. He was apparently in Denmark at the time they recorded, but this one sounds like a nicely polished Beatles tune. It's I Me Mine, and it's a George composition. And again, George is just about to blow up musically, so it kind of makes sense. It's a big sound. It's a sort of mournful cry about selfishness in the world. The one thing that's kind of weird of it is the chorus, I me mine, sounds kind of very different than the verse, I me mine, I me mine, I me mine. The chorus actually sounds like it was written by John, so it's kind of funny that John wasn't even involved in the recording process for this one. Track 5 is Dig It. It's just sort of 50 seconds of John ranting the names of cultural and political figures, I guess a sort of predecessor to Gimme Some Truth, not much of anything. Then the next track, title track, huge one, Let It Be. In my earliest Beatles reaction videos, I noticed I almost didn't bother to explain the ones that I see as super famous, the ones that I didn't need to listen to the albums to know about. So I really regret that I didn't say more about Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So I'm going to try and say a little more about Let It Be. It was a song that Paul was inspired by in a dream, and he refers to Mother Mary. And listening to the song from a distance, I always assumed that this must refer to some semi-famous Catholic figure, like a Mother Teresa equivalent. But no, Paul's mother, who died when he was 14, was named Mary. And then, of course, some people can interpret it as referring to the Virgin Mary. But, Paul just likes the idea of this vague comforter figure. And kind of like Across the Universe with Nothing's Gonna Change My World, there's an interesting ambiguity to this one. So you could hear the lines, let it be, is not very comforting at all. It's accept whatever's gonna happen, even if what's going to happen is unhappy, but then Paul brilliantly juxtaposes it with the comfort of Mother Mary. So take the advice of let it be, but I can really assure you, it's not just accept your fate. Your fate is going to be okay, and your fate is going to be empowering with the big sound on this one. And it's really simple instrumentation, but everything it does, it just sounds nice. You get some organ playing from Billy Preston. You get a nice guitar solo from George Harrison. I assume anyone listening to this record will tell right away why it's the title track and why this is one of the few standards this recording process produced. Track number 7 is Maggie May. No, it's not the Rod Stewart song that would come out a few years later. It's an old Liverpool folk song. Again, you only get a few minutes of it, but unlike Dig It, I thought it was a real highlight. Just the drumming and the fun in the singing was really good, and it would have been nice to hear more of it. Also, there's a really weird pronunciation of Liverpool in the song, and I've heard this in multiple versions, so I guess it's just a kind of more pure or more old-timey Liverpool accent to call it Liverpool, or however they say it. Track 8 is I've Got a Feeling. This is a mixing up of songs, in this case an unfinished song by Paul and an unfinished song by John. This is something Paul was obviously into. Examples include A Day in the Life from Sgt. Pepper's, the long one from Abbey Road, and things that Paul would go on to do later, like Uncle Albert and Admiral Halsey. The Paul's part of the song, it sounds like more style than something polished or particularly nice. I guess Paul just likes to use his lower screamy voice at some points on a recording, and that's all I get out of his song. John's is supposedly quite pessimistic. He's sort of talking mournfully about, a year in which he became addicted to heroin and in which his marriage with Cynthia finally dissolved. But the John part on this song actually sounds cleaner and easier to listen to. It kind of has the charm of a nice, easygoing rap to it, because John is pretty much just singing one note, and he's singing cleanly over a very rhythmic backing section. Like, it's not rap, but that kind of describes the feeling I get from listening to John's part of this song. So I've Got a Feeling and Everybody's Had a Hard Year, which is the name of the John part. Okay, track 8. Track number 9 is One After 909. This is an old recording of theirs. It's a bit messy, but it has a nice rocker sound to it. Sounds a bit more like something the Rolling Stones would have recorded. Then you get to track 10, The Long and Winding Road, another favorite of mine, another #1 hit for the Beatles. The thing that stands out with this one is the punchy orchestration and the backup choir. This was added when Phil Spector went on to record the record. Phil Spector being known for his wall of sound, using, I guess, explaining this in a non-sophisticated way, I guess using a lot of different instruments to make a sound as rich as possible. One of the iconic examples being his ex-wife Ronnie Spector song Be My Baby, which is just a simple 60s pop song but just has this very complex layered instrumentation behind it. But Paul really didn't like Phil Spector doing this to his song, and more recently Paul released the Let It Be Naked album, which tries to remove the Phil Spector production, and it surprised me actually how similar it sounded. You get that big sound without the orchestration, and just, I guess, with piano and guitar and drums and bass used just the right way. But it's a very simple song, but it's a very beautiful melody, sang very sincerely by Paul. So not a lot to analyze about this one, whether you like the Phil Spector version or whether you prefer the underproduced Paul version. Great song either way, and maybe just stays out of the Beatles' A list because there's not anything particularly memorable about the lyrics. Then you get to track 11, For You Blue. This is a very simple blues song, but unlike when John tries to do the blues and has a very scratchy, angry voice, George just sounds very relaxed and mellow when he's doing this one. And so while For You Blue would rank towards the bottom for me amongst George Harrison's compositions, I appreciate that he seems to be one of the few artists here who understands that the Beatles can go back to a rootsy sound without that rootsy sound being, kind of messy with the voices being suppressed in the mix. It's a nice, clean song. It's a fine song. And then you get track 12. It opens with more banter, and finally you realize it's another Beatles classic, Get Back. It starts with a simple, loud riff. Supposedly there was more vision in this song at one point. It was imagined as a protest song against the anti-immigration politician Enoch Powell with a lyric about how he didn't want Pakistanis in Britain. I mean, it's not a very interesting song, but it lives up to its title. It does feel like the Beatles are getting back with this one to their early approach to songwriting. So some of what's frustrating in the end, I guess, with Let It Be is just some of the weird choices of what was included in the album, what could have been a lot better with a few more takes. Like, I just wish they had found a way to make a more polished version of Two of Us. One of the great songs of this session, Don't Let Me Down, wasn't included on the final version of the record. I assume, again, it was because the track listing was compiled by Phil Spector. Phil Spector was American, and in America, they put out this Beatles Greatest Hits or later hits collection called Hey Jude that already had Don't Let Me Down on it, but I feel like that song's at the heart of this recording session. I don't get why Let It Be is in the middle of the album rather than at the end. I think Get Back should be the opening track for a record. It's not powerful enough to be a closer, but it's a fine song. It's a nice opening. It's a nice thesis statement for the album. So this album was produced under kind of hectic conditions. But I also think the Beatles, like the Stones, made this kind of mistake where they wanted to get back to their roots, but they kind of forgot what was great about their roots. So I know a lot of people were happy to see the Stones jump from Their Satanic Majesties to Beggar's Banquet, because, you know, Their Satanic Majesties was a real mess of an album. And I think the Stones and listeners said, okay, the problem is you're too into the 60s psychedelia sound, and you really just need to get back into raw, rootsy blues. And from then on, the guitars got louder, Mick started screaming rather than singing. But the actual core blues of the Stones you hear on their first few records, Mick isn't screaming. He's a very articulate singer. He's just a little expressive, a little sassy, and has a nice, subtly good voice and gets the most out of classic blues songs. And similarly with the early Beatles, the recordings aren't messy and rootsy. They're very cleanly produced with nice, simple lyrics and beautiful vocal harmonies with John and Paul and occasionally George. So while this record might have been an attempt to get back to the original Beatles sound, and one alternative to this album cover was a reproduction of their Please Please Me album cover with the Beatles with their modern hair, it seems like they forgot how to get back. They didn't know how to write songs anymore, like I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You, yeah, 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 and Please Please Me. Like, Get Back was the closest they got, and that's a nice song, but it doesn't have the same catchy punch and sweetness as those originals. So it's a shame the Beatles never had the time to sit back and think, what would it mean to really make a Get Back album to rediscover their old sound? But undoubtedly, there are some good ones on here, like Let It Be and The Long and Winding Road. And the other thing I think about this one is, you know, even if Abbey Road is the polished conclusion to the Beatles' career, this is the real conclusion. So I kind of like the idea that there were two last Beatles albums. The last album that maybe they all wanted to make was Abbey Road, and then the album that really speaks to the end of a band, and I guess Paul's vision for a last album was Let It Be. So this has been a lot of fun making this series. I'm glad I listened to these Beatles albums, the ones I liked more and the ones I liked less, and I'd certainly lean towards saying I liked all of them on the more end of the spectrum. So look forward to making more videos on all other kinds of albums. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.